Hi. So as you just heard, I did start life as a chartered engineer, which meant that I had the benefit of working with 200 years worth of experience, expertise, academics, working with practitioners, great standards, a real understanding for the discipline. And then I moved into marketing and PR, and what a laugh, to be honest. I was shocked at how unscientific the approach was. But that was at the end of the 90s, just as we were starting to have IT impact marketing and PR. I think IT really shook up accounting in the 60s and 70s, manufacturing in the 70s and 80s, retail in the 80s and 90s. And if you like, the last bastions, the last holdout was us lot in marketing and public relations. We tried to almost deny that things were changing. And then in 1999, as I switched industries, I read 2 books because I thought I'd best find out what marketing and PR is if I'm going to succeed in growing a company here. And so I read the Clue Train Manifesto and Permission Marketing. And to me, they were 2 massive signposts that said things were about to change, and change in a big way. Throughout the 20th century, the balance of power, if you like, between the stakeholder, the individual stakeholder, and by that I mean the citizen or the consumer. The balance of power was such that you felt like you were just a tiny little cog in a massive machine. And there was no way that you could impact what these big corporates were doing to us. Philosophers would say we were reifying these corporates because they were so big, there was no way we could interact, engage, to use the word that threads everything that this company does. And of course that's changed. We've all seen that in the last 10 years with the rise of so-called Web 2.0 and social media. Once again, consumers can coalesce and share opinions and voice their concerns and their excitement about the corporates, and the corporates have to listen because they're prospects and other stakeholders are listening. So there's a new transparency, but I'm not going to go battle on about that because that's teaching you guys to suck eggs. You know all about that sort of stuff. But here's the crux of the matter. When you go to a conference and you hear someone presenting about how they've just doubled followers and tripled friends and quadrupled retweets, ask, so what? And then they give you a bit of an answer, and then you just ask, a little bit like a 3-year-old child, ask, so what again? And when they give you a bit more of an answer, just be really stubborn and be a right arse and say, so what? Just that 3rd time. And that's usually enough to break them, because suddenly they realise that they've been working in complete isolation. They've been doing what we felt was working, but didn't really understand how the marketing and PR activity they were engaging in, whether that was analogue or digital, did anything at all for the business. And then along comes the annual report, and the chairman does the foreword, and nowhere in that foreword does the chairman say, we've had a good year, we've doubled retweets. Nowhere does that appear. It doesn't say, we've got a great Facebook page, oh my God, it's rocking and rolling. Nowhere does that feature. Why? Because what we're doing is a means to an end. But at the moment, the connection between the means and the ends is almost completely and utterly broken. So I represented the Chartered Institute of Public Relations in Barcelona last year for the Association for the Measurement and Evaluation of Communications. A bit of a dry topic, AMEC, where we came up with what are known as the Barcelona Principles. And one of the principles is that advertising value equivalence, AVE, is no longer a good measure of public relations activity. In fact, we went so far as to say it never was. And in fact, actually, if you look over in the paid media side of things, the advertising guys have no better way of measuring what they're doing either. And then actually, if you go to the interactive guys, they've got no better way of demonstrating their worth either. There's a complete disconnect. And every time you meet a CMO or a managing director who's trying to get to grips with this Web 2.0, this social media stuff that he finds his kids playing on 24/7, he says, give it a go, here's 500 quid, we'll get something started. The next year he puts down 50,000, and the budget keeps growing until the point where you get to the trough of disillusionment. And that trough of disillusionment is where he says, bugger, is anybody going to tell me what benefit we've had from all this money we're spending with Global Dawn? Anybody, please, because I'd like to cut them a check again this time next year. We're just doing the budgeting for 2012. Anybody, please tell me what the ROI is for working with Global Dawn. And there's silence. Because all they can talk about, generally, is how good the Facebook page is compared to the competitors, how good interactive people are on Twitter. But it doesn't say what's important for the business. So I thought I'd try and make a connection between the two because it would be worth everybody's while. I thought if we could actually get a little bit more scientific about this. So there is an extant framework called the Balanced Scorecard. It was invented by some guys called Kaplan and Norton at the beginning of the 90s. They're both Harvard professors. And they looked at how businesses measure and assess their performance. And up until the beginning of the 90s, this is where it gets dry, so I'll try and get through this really quickly so I don't lose your attention. But up to that point, there were 3 financial reports that basically said whether an organisation was doing really well or not. They were the profit and loss, the balance sheet, and the cash flow. And every organisation around the world used those 3 financial reports to say whether they were doing what they said they were going to do. And for for-profit organisations, that was to generate a profit and a return for shareholders. But the problem with those is that they're looking backwards. It takes a couple of months to close last quarter. It takes a quarter to close last year. So whenever you're talking about financial measures, it's like you're driving along in the car and all you're doing is navigating by looking in the rear mirror. Because it's only telling you how well you did back then, not whether what you're doing today is setting you up to do fantastic things tomorrow. So they searched for some universal measures that would apply to all organisations, governmental, non-profit, for-profit. And they came up with 3 complementary perspectives to the financial perspective. And whereas the financial perspective is a lagging indicator, in their words, looking back at how we did, the 3 perspectives they came up with said if you find some balanced metrics for each of these perspectives that align directly up to your strategy, or another way of putting that is that they cascade directly down from your strategy, then if we follow these measures and people perform as they are measured, then we'll be pointing the organisation in the right direction. And if we succeeded for these forward-looking metrics, when we close the books, we'll find that we performed as we wanted to fiscally. And that is now the dominant framework for business performance management around the world. The majority of the top 5,000 companies around the world use a balanced scorecard approach or a balanced scorecard type approach. Except it hasn't really touched marketing and PR people because it's only been 15 years. And I thought that was unacceptable. So my book introduces something called the influence scorecard, which tries to make that connection so that we can see what we do hour by hour, day by day, week by week, in terms of encouraging engagement between an organisation and all its stakeholders, categorically links to what the business is trying to do. You can see the contribution you've all made to the achievement of the business objectives. Alongside that, one of the things I felt that was holding us all back, and it'd be interesting to hear from you guys whether you share this opinion, is that we continue to obsess with the silos of the 20th century. We have media buying, we have guys who do ads, we have media relations people, we have CSR kind of people, public affairs, everything. Oh, and then there's this new breed called digital, and they wear new media glasses and tank tops, and sometimes they go out in the daylight and everything. So, and people buy digital like it's a separate component, like, I don't know, like in the 1920s you might have bought telephone, whereas nobody should be considering that way of working. I had a chat with Mary Jean Lozier, who used to be the COO of Weber Shandwick, in 2007, and I asked her why her new company, the W2 Group, was selling digital as a service you could buy. Optional. Would you like digital? We do digital really well. Would you like some digital, sir? And I said, Mary Jean, what are we doing? This is ridiculous. It's like selling telephones separately. Digital permeates everything we do. Why are we distinguishing between digital and analog when actually what we should be doing is working for our customers' success? Full stop. And she said, darling, we sell it because that's what people buy. And I just realised I'd been given a really salient marketing lesson. Except that was 2007 and now it's 2011. I think there's an opportunity for companies like yours to start being that hub, that glue that starts to break down those arbitrary silos that are left over from the 20th century way of working. To provide that horizontal level that ignores things like, oh, I only do public relations, or I only do marketing, or I only do customer service. Actually, what you want to do is glue all of those disciplines and expertise together and focus them on achieving the business objectives. So that's what I wrote the book for. I'm delighted to say I've just been invited to go and present at Dreamforce in San Francisco at the end of August, which is the Salesforce.com big bash. I think 25,000 people descend on San Francisco to worship at the altar of Benioff. But what's interesting about that, of course, is Salesforce.com bought Radian 6 in January. And Radian 6, as you know, was the dominant, probably the #1 platform for social analytics. So what we're starting to see is the connection of different analytical repositories together in order to better understand our stakeholders. Social analytics with retail analytics, with CRM, with other forms of business intelligence. And the organisations that are most adept at dealing with data, machining it into information, converting information into knowledge, and knowledge eventually into wisdom, one hopes, then the smarter the organisation will be at responding to the nascent needs in the marketplace. And if you can help them do that, they'll pay you for it, particularly if you can demonstrate an absolute, clear, crystal, concrete connection between the check they cut you every month and the benefits that you deliver to them when they tot up the money at the end of the year. So that's the story. Thanks very much.